Were looking for alternative ways of living. I mean, people were looking to live in communes. As I said, there was this ideal about nature with the good life and self-sufficiency, that you could go out into the country. If you could choose to abandon the city and go to the country, I think Dennis, in the same spirit, said, I will abandon, he did, didn't he? I will abandon the 20th century. I don't like the 20th century, it is not meant for me. I'm not going to live here, I'm going to live in the 18th century.
Despite his Victorian coach, he was still at the mercy of modern London, with its steel and glass, its noise and traffic. The cost of keeping the horse and carriage forced him to make money by giving tours on it. What he really needed was a place where he could lock all this out.
I've found an early 18th century house at Spitalfields near the city, which I'm very excited about, because that's a community that really needs help, and it wants help, and there are others doing it with me, and it's going to be really exciting.
I was one of the others Dennis was referring to. I'd already been living in Spitalfields for a couple of years when he moved in round the corner from me. Our mutual fascination with the area led to us becoming friends. Walking into Spitalfields at the time was like walking into a living, breathing, authentic piece of 18th century city, a remarkable survival. The 300-year-old fruit and veg market created some amazing Hogarthian vignettes, tramps sitting around great bonfires, maybe eating fruit abandoned by the market traders, and these harlots plying their trade down the dark alleys, and all this set against the backdrop of rotting and long abandoned early Georgian terrace houses. It was a piece of remarkable living history, perfect for Dennis to move into. Once settled, Dennis set about creating his fantasy. The house he moved into was built in 1724. Nearly 3 centuries of change had taken their toll, but Dennis set about returning it to its past. Electric wiring was ripped out and the heating removed. In fact, he did the exact opposite of what most of us do in our own homes.
If the candles in this house are not lit, I don't see. If the vegetables in the kitchen are not boiled, I don't eat. If the fires are not lit, I freeze. If the beds aren't slept in, I don't sleep. Everything is used as it was. And that's the magic.
But how was Dennis paying for his fantasy? In Escondido, the family-owned petrol station was pumping out only just enough money to keep him going. I wonder what the folks back home made of Dennis using their money to build a house in another country, and more strangely, in another century. As one of Dennis's neighbours, I was invited to his punch parties. There was something about the atmosphere that made these evenings very agreeable.
Potential dynamite.
Mr. Ricardo Shinane.
Hi, you got out of the studio. Hi. Very good. Ricardo.
Mr. Daniel Cruickshank.
Hi, Dan.
See you, Dennis.
Ricardo.
Looking back at it now, I feel embarrassed at how self-conscious we look. Dennis, however, comes out of it better. We guests were, after all, play acting, but he really believed it. He'd created an environment where, finally, he felt comfortable and could be himself. And he was deliriously happy.
To you all.
Looking at this free and easy Dennis, I barely recognised the man he was to become. Having created his 18th century world, Dennis now found a family to share it with. The only thing is, this family didn't exist.
I live here with a fictitious family called the Jarvises. There are 4 generations of them. They're not spectacular people, they're middle-class people, silk weavers, Huguenots, and they conform completely to the spirit of their age. The footman works for them, and I live in proxy for them. And everything I do, from the time I get up in the morning to a quick use of the chamber pot at midnight, all is done for them.
In creating his family, Dennis looked to the area in which he lived. French street names like Fournier Street, Fleur-de-Lis, and French Place suggested his family should be Huguenots, French Protestant refugees who settled in Spitalfields at the end of the 17th century. Curtain Road and Fashion Street, the legacy of Spitalfield's textile industry, inspired him to make them silk weavers. Up to now, Dennis's life at 18 Folgate Street had been pretty frugal. But having created the Jarvis family, Dennis needed to provide for them. If they were to be believable, they would need clothes, furniture, food, everything a household of that size might require. He was going to need more money. And then Dennis started to give tours of the house, and he charged visitors for a fever-pitched 3-hour trip through time. Dennis would usher the visitors into this room here. They sit in a row here. He would then retreat, close the door, and turn off the light. They would sit here, these people, bemused, fearful, confused, terrified really. I was here once when two middle-aged American ladies, I suppose their minds full of tales of Jack the Ripper, panicked and bolted out the door. Usually the people would stick it out, and Dennis would return after 10 minutes, put the lights on. They'd be sitting here, cowed. He, of course, had control, was masterful. He'd captured the initiative, you see.
We began in the cellar. I think by the time you'd got to the first floor, you were totally captivated. And you then realised, certainly by halfway through, you realise this is going to be perfect.
I'm going to take you through the frame and into another world. A world that has now gone, but the echoes of which are still with us. The inhabitants of this world lived in our houses, walked our streets, ate in our markets, worshipped in our churches. And yet, we still find it difficult to understand them, to really feel the past. I'm going to take you into that world, and I will create in your mind a memory of it, which you will take away with you and keep forever.
It was the best theatre in town. You would come to Spitalfields, which, you know, a lot of people would never have even been to this part of town. And you would be mesmerized by this fantastic bit of theatre.
The story of the Jarvises begins at the end of the 17th century with the arrival of Isaac Jarvis, an exile from the anti-Protestant persecution in France. Through hard work, he becomes a wealthy silk merchant, but each successive generation lacks the integrity and industry of their forefather, and the family's fortune begins to dwindle. In telling his story, Dennis emulated the 18th century painter William Hogarth.
You know, Hogarth tells us a history through things. Every object in a Hogarth print, a clock, a statue, a shoe, it has a moral point to make. And in this house, that's absolutely the same. I mean, everything tells you a bit of the story, you know, a creaking door, a candle, a collection of china.
And what of the young boy, William Jarvis? While his father focused on business, William grew up, spoilt and ignored. Boyhood tantrums gave way to midnight carouses. He was spotted in the lowest dens of Clerkenwell, in the company of disreputable women. Rumors spread of his insatiable sexual appetite, of the wealth wasted on gambling, of craven orgies, and days spent in an opium-induced trance. Then suddenly, he disappeared for 2 days and returned with a fever. He was distracted, picked at his food. He complained that it was too dark or too light. One night, when the household thought their master asleep, William Jarvis hanged himself at the top of the house.